Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101 back at you again with some more lore. And in today's video, boys and gals, we are back with what people get wrong about X series. And today we're talking about Imperial Knights. So buckle up, get ready, grab a snack, and let's get talking about everyone's favorite big, stompy, noble, hoity-toity robots. Yes. The origins of the Imperial Knights lie within the origins of humanity. When humanity first launched into the stars, they launched on the first ever sublight ships, that being known as the Long March ships. You see, FTL travel, faster than light, had not yet been invented, for we had not yet discovered the warp and all the demons that lay in it. Therefore, the only way to get from planet A to planet B was to put a few tens of thousands of people on a ship and have them travel about half a century to go and find the new planet. When the ship would land, they would then cannibalize said ship, and then use it to form their first city. And they would need vehicles to produce stuff. Thus, the first ever knights were made. Created via SEC constructs or created and boarded on the ships and of themselves, these giant mech suits were made to be vehicles of utility. They had massive chain swords for clearing out logging, and they had massive lasers for mining, and some of them came equipped with some guns to chase off any local flora or fauna. However, what people ended up happening is that these new colonies were often very tempting targets for many different types of malevolent Xenos races, more specifically of the piratical variety. Thus, these giant suits would turn from logging to warfare. Some of them came equipped already with a few defensive weapons, but these were easily augmented with extra plating, ion shields, and even heavier weaponry. And thus, in conjunction with the strong infantry element, these guardians would defend the colony from all types of evil. And the pilots became known as knights, as a throwback to old ancient Terra, for these were noble men and women who defended the working people in giant suits of armor. And with humans being humans, we love making references to our own history. And I don't know about you, if someone called me a knight, I would not tell them no. Thus, these colonies went from cities to continents to towns, and versions and sprung over across all of the world, some even multiple worlds, and they became thriving interstellar aspects of the human empire. And the knights continued, with so-called knightly houses forming, but not in the traditional sense as back on old Terra. These were more colloquial names, and were much more symbolic rather than any type of military rule. But that would all change, as when Old Knight came a-knockin', and the interstellar human empire was thrust into chaos and turmoil, these colony worlds are left to their own devices, and thus they had to change and adapt on their own. And in a few of these colony worlds, what would end up happening is that they would regress in terms of technology, back to the terms of the medieval age, except for one aspect: the knights. Thus, we get literal feudal worlds, set in the 13th and 14th centuries with knights as a ruling nobility. However, instead of a barded destrier with plate mail, we then have a giant knight with a massive battle cannon and a fuck-off huge chainsword. And we get a very interesting picture of these massive mechs battling in the background, while in the foreground we have ranks of men-at-arms armed with poleaxes fighting each other and halting cavalry charges, longbowmen piercing the distance, and crossbowmen trying to counter them. It's a very interesting idea, and personally I'd like to see like a web series or something set during that time. It'd be very unique. But eventually Big E would launch his Great Crusade, and many of these knight worlds would be reunited with the Imperium at large, and be reintroduced to the concept of technology. But after the heresy, the fall of the Emperor, and the loss of the Primarchs, the Imperium would continue to regress. Thus, some knight worlds would regress along with them, but that's the thing. Some. Not all. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we come to with what people get wrong about Imperial Knights. They're not feudal. Well, not all of them. You see, there are indeed feudal worlds still in the Imperium, that being worlds which are still stuck in the 12th and 14th century. You have villages and men-at-arms, cavalry and all that, but you have these giant castles that house suits of knight armor. But you also have the modern knight world, that being a knight world that does have a nobility, or an aristocracy more likely, but instead of their men-at-arms having plate mail, they have carapace armor as well as lasguns. They have their own armored mounts in terms of Leman Russes and Chimeras rather than mounted destriers. And they have very much modern technology. There's not really so much of a serf population as it's much more of a middle class, or quote-unquote working class, whatever the 40k's equivalent is, and they live on pretty modern worlds, but it is a aristocracy ruling them. Think much more of the neo-feudalism from Battletech. I think that fits quite aptly towards the knight houses, and there are many similarities between the two. You see, what people end up getting wrong about medieval knights is they think that they're just one type of stereotype. And of course that stereotype does exist, the idea of the hoity-toity medieval noble in a mech suit. That's that. But they're not that. Whenever people think of nobility, they often think of the cruel noble, who simply doesn't care about his people and treats them as garbage. And that is very much an issue of pop culture, but we do have accounts of there being very evil nobles in our past. But If you look into it, it's far more nuanced, as in everything, and in Warhammer 40k, it's even more nuanced. Yes, while most knights can be a bit hoity-toity and a bit of jerks, they often are very noble. Noble to a fault in some cases. The sense of honor and duty that surrounds them is palpable, because if you do indeed take a medieval knight from a feudal world, he commands an Imperial Knight, a giant mech, and his opponents have mechs, but their infantry have swords. They have no chance in hell of piercing them, even with the strongest trebuchet, even with the strongest cannon that they have. The only thing that can beat him is another knight. And when you have such power, and you may think that someone may turn into an asshole, but what you don't understand is that the throne mechanicum, the device in which the Knight Scion melds his mind to the Knight Machine, it was created with the memories of the original people as its core. And the original core were not nobles. They were men and women, knights, protecting people from raiders, from monsters. So when a Knight Scion interfaces with that, that overrides their base desires. You do have some bad knights, but more often than not, the majority of the knights are good men and women. A bit hoity-toity, yes, but they still want to protect the people around them, the people whom they see as weaker than them. Hence, knights on the battlefield are usually always some of the best people you can meet. And that of course translates out of it as well. Imperial Knights are not just kings and queens, lords and ladies on some bloody random world. They can indeed have their own guard regiments, or pseudo-guard regiments. Men-at-arms is what they're usually called. And these men-at-arms regiments can indeed be armed and well-equipped and well-trained. It's usually out of their own pockets, mind you, so they're usually a bit more smaller. Think 1 or 2 regiments that have tens of regiments, but they're usually well-trained and trained to operate in conjunction with the Imperial Knight and the armigers. The armigers are essentially the men-at-arms of the knight houses, usually quite literally men-at-arms of the knight houses. More often than not, when we see knights in media, they're usually just knights and armigers. There's no supporting infantry, there's no supporting armor, there's nothing really. But in reality, that is something that is different. While yes, knights operating independently is indeed a thing, it makes far more sense to have some supporting infantry with them. And unlike titans, which are actually deadly to infantry, a knight can indeed be deadly to infantry, but it's a lot easier to get out of a knight's way than it is to get out of a titan's way. And again, it comes back to the whole idea of it. When most people think of knights, they think of nobles. When they think of nobles, they think of jerks. It's very much a modern pop culture myth, and people widely accept that back in the day, every noble was bad. That is not true in the slightest. As any historian will tell you, there were some nobles that were far better than many leaders today, but there were also some nobles which are very, very, very evil. But the fact of the matter is, there were both aspects. It wasn't just one. And people often forget about that in regards to medieval knights. Imperial Knights, there can indeed be a jerky noble who thinks that he's everything and comes from a world in which his men-at-arms are armed with sabers. But you can also get a noble who is good, who is true, who is honest, and comes from a civilized world, where he is indeed the ruler, and it is a nobility, but is again much more of a good style of neo-feudalism, rather than the old style, which is completely bad. But let's talk a little bit more about the Imperial Knights now. Imperial Knights hold a very important place in Warhammer 40k. Not only in 40k, but the community. There are very, 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 very few people who dislike the Knights as a faction. Why? Because at the end of the day, they're very simple. They're giant robots. I mean, we all love them for that. But moreover, it's what they represent. We're always fascinated with the idea of a knight, with the idea of nobility. I mean, it's one of the oldest stories we have, St. George and the Dragon, the noble knight slaying the terrible dragon and saving the princess. The idea of a shining man in armor, ready to give up his life for king, for country, for the people around him. It's something that is so infectious in the human psyche. It always has existed and it always will exist. And at the end of the day, it makes sense why Imperial Knights are so important not only in 40k, but also outside of it in our own real world. Because they're bloody awesome. Not only literally in that they're giant robots, but because of what they represent. The noble, the good man doing what needs to be done. That fascination enraptures us so much because we look at it and we want it, we desire it to be good. Not only for that good person to exist, but moreover we want to be that noble knight. We want to slay the dragon, we want to save the princess. And it makes sense that how in 40k that would become quite literal. When you already have an established cast of people, now granted they may not exactly be rulers, but they're knights, they're protectors, they have histories of people guarding and keeping you. It makes sense that you would automatically go to them and choose them as your leaders. Because ultimately what you want a leader to do is to look after you, to protect you, Protecting you is a big part of looking after you, and who better to protect you than a giant dude with a knight who has literally been protecting you for hundreds if not thousands of years. And that idea of the good man is so natured into us. In 40k, it makes sense why most Imperial Knights are generally good people. The throne mechanicum is something that literally interfaces with your mind, and the spirits as well as personalities of other knight pilots are stored in there, and we consider that the origin of the knight pilot was a protector, wholesale. No noble title, no ruling leadership, just literally men and women who had to guard and keep their colony. When you have thousands of years of memories imprinting themselves on new and new pilots, it makes sense why knights are more often not good people. And part of the reason why people often assume that knights are just assholes is because of modern nihilism. Recently, in the past 20 years, people often look on history with a bit of a negative view. I either see the people there as backward, regressive, or just plain stupid, but that's a very biased way to look at it. Human beings have always been human beings. You look at it in any age, be it the 1700s, the 1990s, or even the 400s. You will always have humans who try and make life better. You will always be able to connect to them on some level. If you meet a noble, yeah, he may be an asshole, but there's a good chance that he's just a dude. He has his own favorite food, he loves his mom, and he's just like you and me. It is very childish to assume that every noble was a good man who wanted the best for his country, but the opposite is also true. It's very childish to assume that each noble was just an asshole who wanted more power and more money and who didn't care about the people around him. More often than not, it was a balance in the middle. And for us in Warhammer 40k to just assume that every single knight that we see is just some asshole who comes from a feudal world and doesn't want any type of advancement or change, he just wants to hold on to power, is wholly incorrect. There are indeed knights who have men-at-arms who are basically citizens rather than serfs. And just as it's wrong to assume that every knight is a good guy who lives on a civilized world, the inverse is also true. Every knight is not an asshole from a feudal world. So when you're looking at Imperial Knights as a whole, if you want to make a knight in a civilized world who has his own guard regiment of mechanized infantry to support the armigers and the knights, go for it. It's canon, it makes sense, but at the same time, if you meet a chap who has literally Imperial Knights and goddamn pikemen, and he's a jackass to them and lives under a pseudo grimdark dystopian future, that's also valid. Remember, in Warhammer 40k, there are many worlds, million worlds. You can have pretty much anything on those worlds. So long as it does not directly conflict with established canon, you're pretty much alright to do it. And ultimately, that just depends on what you want to do. If you are doing something out of the goodness and kindness of your heart because you love it, people are going to see that and they're going to be willing to help it. And if they don't, well, they're probably just that 5% who get upset at anything that isn't their super special OC. Don't worry about those people. But all in all, what people get wrong about Imperial Knights is that they're not just one stereotype of noble. You can have many different kinds, and flush out and build your own night house. And at the end of the day, remember, it doesn't really matter who's driving it, because at the end of the day, it is a giant stompy robot with a big ass war horn. And god damn it, if that ain't cool, I don't know what is. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for watching. I do love and appreciate it. Let me know down below. Did you guys know that some Imperial Knights have civilized worlds? That some of their dudes have glass guns and armor? Or did you think that all of them just live on feudal worlds? And let me know, what do you think? Do you think that the civilized Knight world is the best, or is the feudal Knight world the best? Do you like the other and hate the other? And let me know down below what you just think about this video. But other than all, thank you all so very much for watching, and a massive thank you to my members. Big shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Withdraw of the Void. Big shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. RB20 Guy, and Mr. Corns Butcher. And shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Muslons, Mr. Ivan_SBW, and Mr. Michael Hayeda. I love y'all oh so very much, it means the world to me. If you want to gain early access to these videos, sneak peeks, previews, exclusive polls, as well as making choices and helping out building this channel and on the overall direction, sign up to the memberships. You get access to a bunch of awesome stuff and you get to help your boy out. And if you sign up to our Captain tier, you get to choose a video of yourself. Any topic, whatever it is, you tell me what it is and I will gladly make it for you. But remember, this will always be free, never feel pressured about joining up. If you can, great. If you can't, perfectly fine. You simply watching will be more than enough for me and I will always love you no matter what. Mwah! Yes, I will. But ladies and gentlemen, I have been the General Bradley 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank y'all oh so very much for watching. I do love and appreciate y'all. Make sure you stay strong out there, boys and girls. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. your favorite knight? Mine is the Knight Paladin, but love me Knight Castellan. Let me know down below.